The Grand Conclave Hall of Harmony Prime Station stretched out like a vast cathedral, made of crystal and metal. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the floating platforms that orbited the central speaking area. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert hundreds of languages into something everyone could understand. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat straight in her chair, her dark hair pulled back in a simple style that looked professional but not fancy. She wore the standard Earth diplomatic uniform, navy blue with small silver stars on the collar. Around her, the other human delegation members shuffled through their electronic tablets, preparing for another long day of negotiations. The Galactic Federation had called this meeting to discuss trade routes and resource sharing. For 3 weeks now, representatives from dozens of worlds had argued about mining rights, shipping lanes, and who got what percentage of rare minerals. Elena had learned to spot the different species by now. The Zephyrians looked like walking crystal sculptures, their bodies catching the station's artificial light and throwing rainbows across the walls. When they spoke, their voices sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The Kithvar delegation took up an entire section on the far side of the hall. These insect-like beings stood nearly 3 meters tall, their forearms moving in complex patterns as they communicated with each other. Their exoskeletons gleamed black and green, and their large compound eyes never seemed to focus on just one thing at a time. Elena had learned not to take it personally when they looked past her while talking. Near the central pool, the Melodians floated in their water-filled environmental suits. Their flowing tentacle-like bodies moved with a grace that reminded Elena of underwater dancers. They spoke in musical tones that the translators had trouble converting, often adding footnotes like approximate meaning or cultural context required. But it was the Valdorian Empire delegation that commanded the most attention. They sat in the highest platform, looking down at everyone else with expressions that suggested they found the whole proceedings beneath them. Lady Thalandra, their chief representative, embodied everything Elena had heard about Valdorian nobility. Her pale blue skin had intricate silver markings that showed her high rank. Her white hair was arranged in an elaborate style that probably took hours to create. She wore robes that cost more than most planets' annual budgets. The Valdorians had built one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy through strict social order and military might. They valued strength, intelligence, and absolute loyalty to hierarchy. Elena had studied their culture for months before coming to Harmony Prime, but she still felt like she was missing important details. Today's session focused on the disputed Kepler mining system. 3 different species claimed rights to the asteroid fields there, and none of them wanted to compromise. The Zephyrians argued they had discovered the system first. The Kithavar said their colony ships had been heading there for 50 years. A smaller species called the Torgani claimed their ancestors had lived in that area before anyone else arrived. Elena watched the debate grow more heated as the morning went on. The translators worked frantically as voices rose and tentacles waved. She had seen this pattern before. Everyone stated their position, repeated it louder, and then restated it with more dramatic gestures. Nothing actually got solved. The Torgani claim lacks any supporting evidence, Lady Thalandra said, her voice cutting through the noise like a cold blade. Their so-called historical records are myths and children's stories. The Valdorian Empire does not waste time on fairy tales. Elder Grix of the Torgani delegation stood up, his small frame shaking with anger. The Torgani looked like bipedal rodents, barely reaching Elena's waist, but their passion for justice was enormous. These are not stories. Our oral traditions have preserved the truth for 3,000 years. Your empire thinks anything not written in metal and stone has no value. Because it does not, Thalandra replied. Truth requires proof. Proof requires evidence. Evidence requires documentation. Your traditions are entertainment, nothing more. Elena felt her diplomatic training kick in. She could see where this was heading. Another deadlock that would waste days while people argued about who was right instead of finding a solution that worked for everyone. She stood up and activated her platform's speaking system. Honored delegates, she began. Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle. The hall quieted down. Elena had learned that humans had a reputation for saying unexpected things, so other species often listened when they spoke, if only to see what strange idea would come out. Instead of arguing about who found the Kepler system first, why don't we ask who can develop it best? The Zephyrians have excellent mining technology. The Kithvar have the transport ships. The Torgani have knowledge of the local space conditions from their oral histories, and if we're talking about historical claims, we should also consider what's best for the system itself. She gestured to her tablet, which projected a holographic display of the Kepler asteroid fields. These asteroids contain minerals that 7 different species need for their technology. Instead of one group taking everything, we could create a joint development project. Each species contributes what they do best and shares in the profits based on their contribution. The Zephyrian representative created a series of musical notes that translated as interesting. Approach. The Kithvar delegation buzzed among themselves in their clicking language. Elder Grix tilted his head, considering the idea, but Lady Thalandra looked down at Elena with an expression that seemed almost amused. The human suggests cooperation over conquest. How quaint. The Valdorian Empire has not built its strength through sharing resources with inferior civilizations. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. With respect, Lady Thalandra, working together doesn't make anyone inferior. It makes everyone stronger. When species combine their abilities, they accomplish things none of them could do alone. Strength comes from order and hierarchy, Thalandra replied. Weakness comes from committee decisions and compromise solutions. The human lacks understanding of how power functions in the galaxy. Maybe, Elena said, but I understand how problem-solving works. And right now we have a problem that's been sitting here for 3 weeks without a solution. We can spend another 3 weeks arguing about ancient claims, or we can find a way forward that benefits everyone. She looked around the hall, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. The Torgani say their ancestors knew this system. That's valuable knowledge about navigation hazards, stellar phenomena, and resource locations. The Zephyrians have the best mineral extraction technology in the galaxy. The Kithvar have transport networks that reach every major trade hub. Put that together and you have the most efficient mining operation anyone's ever seen. Elder Grix straightened up. The human speaks with wisdom. Our stories do contain practical knowledge about the Kepler system. Dangerous zones, seasonal changes in the asteroids' positions, where the best minerals can be found. The Zephyrian representative chimed agreement. Efficiency serves all purposes. Cooperation could increase yields beyond what any single species might achieve. Even some of the Kithvar began clicking in patterns that suggested interest. Elena felt momentum building in the room, something that had been missing for weeks of deadlocked negotiations. But then Lady Thalandra stood up, and her presence commanded attention like gravity. When she spoke, her words carried the authority of an empire that controlled hundreds of worlds. The human demonstrates clever thinking, she said, and Elena wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult. She sees problems from unexpected angles. She values cooperation over dominance. She seeks solutions that benefit many rather than victory for one. Thalandra paused, and Elena noticed that the entire hall had gone completely silent. Even the background hum of the translation devices seemed quieter. If only you were my spouse, human. The words hit the hall like a physical blow. Elena felt her mouth fall open. Around the hall, delegates turned to stare at each other in shock. Someone's translation device made a sound like electronic choking. The alien lady's statement shocked everyone in the hall, would have been an understatement. The Zephyrians' crystal bodies actually changed color, cycling through confused patterns of light. The Kithvar stopped their constant clicking entirely. The Melodians in their water suits spun in circles that suggested either celebration or panic. Elena stared up at Lady Thalandra, trying to process what had just happened. In Valdorian culture, marriage was a political alliance based on merit and compatibility. It wasn't romantic. It was a formal recognition that 2 individuals would be stronger together than apart. For a Valdorian noble to suggest marriage to someone from another species was unprecedented. For Lady Thalandra to suggest it publicly in front of the entire Galactic Federation was completely insane. What? Elena managed to say. Lady Thalandra's expression remained perfectly composed, as if she had just commented on the weather instead of turning galactic diplomacy upside down. You heard correctly, Ambassador Vasquez. Your approach to complex problems, your ability to synthesize multiple perspectives into workable solutions. The chaos in the Grand Conclave Hall took nearly an hour to settle down. Elena spent most of that time sitting in her chair, staring at her hands while emergency diplomatic protocols activated around her. 3 different species requested immediate recess. The Kithvar delegates started what looked like a panic dance. Someone from the Outer Rim territories fainted and had to be carried out on a floating medical platform. When order finally returned, Elena found herself in the strangest situation of her career. Half the delegates wanted to interview her about human mating customs. The other half wanted to interview Lady Thalandra about whether she had suffered some kind of mental breakdown. The Melodians kept singing what the translators marked as either celebration songs or funeral dirges. Apparently the distinction was subtle. Elena requested a private meeting with Lady Thalandra during the lunch break. They met in one of Harmony Prime's neutral conference rooms, a simple space with white walls and basic furniture designed not to favor any particular species' preferences. Thalandra arrived with 2 guards who looked like they could bench press a small shuttle, but she dismissed them with a gesture. "You wish to discuss my statement," Thalandra said. "It wasn't a question." "I wish to understand your statement," Elena replied, "because from where I'm sitting, you just announced to the entire galaxy that you want to marry a human you've known for 3 weeks. Either Valdorian culture is very different from what I studied, or something else is going on here." Thalandra settled into her chair with perfect posture. Everything about her movement suggested precision and control. "You studied our culture, but perhaps not deeply enough. Valdorian marriages are not based on what you humans call romantic love. They are merit bonds, formal recognition that 2 individuals complement each other's abilities and would achieve more together than apart." Elena leaned forward. "Okay, but that still doesn't explain why you'd suggest bonding with someone from a completely different species. Don't you have compatibility requirements? Shared values? Common goals?" "Indeed we do." Thalandra's silver marking seemed to shimmer as she spoke, and your performance in today's negotiations demonstrated precisely the qualities that Valdorian society values most: strategic thinking, practical problem solving, and the ability to find advantage in difficult situations. "But I was advocating for cooperation," Elena said. "Your empire is built on dominance and hierarchy. Those seem like opposite approaches, are they?" Thalandra tilted her head slightly. "Consider what you accomplished today. You took a situation where 3 species were deadlocked in conflict and found a path that would give each of them what they actually needed, rather than what they claimed to want. You identified the true strengths of each group and showed how those strengths could be combined for maximum benefit. That is not cooperation. That is superior strategy." Elena felt like she was looking at a puzzle where half the pieces had been rearranged when she wasn't watching. "You're saying that what I call cooperation, you call strategic advantage? I am saying that what you call cooperation achieves the same results as what we call effective leadership, but with significantly less resistance from subordinate parties." Thalandra's expression remained neutral, but Elena caught a hint of something that might have been approval. "Most Valdorian leaders accomplish their goals through direct application of authority. You accomplish yours by making others believe your goals serve their interests as well." "Because they do serve their interests," Elena said. "That's the whole point of cooperation, finding solutions that work for everyone." "Exactly." Thalandra leaned back in her chair. "You achieve optimal outcomes while maintaining the loyalty and enthusiasm of your allies. From a Valdorian perspective, this demonstrates mastery of the highest level of strategic thinking." Elena rubbed her forehead, feeling a headache coming on. "So you're saying that by trying to be fair and inclusive, I'm actually being manipulative and controlling?" "I am saying that your methods produce superior results with minimal cost in resources or political capital. Whether you choose to call that manipulation or cooperation is merely a matter of perspective." The conversation was interrupted by Elena's communication device, which chimed with an urgent message from Earth. She glanced at it and saw that news of Thalandra's proposal had already reached her home government. The message consisted mostly of capital letters and multiple question marks. "This is going to cause problems," Elena said, holding up the device. "My government is probably having emergency meetings right now. Your empire's leadership must be doing the same thing." "Undoubtedly," Thalandra agreed. "The Valdorian High Council will demand explanations. They will question my judgment and my loyalty to traditional values. Some will suggest that prolonged exposure to alien cultures has affected my reasoning. And what will you tell them? That I have identified a potential strategic asset of extraordinary value." Thalandra's voice carried complete confidence. Your species has been part of the Galactic Federation for less than 50 years, yet you have already established trade relationships with 17 different civilizations. Most species require centuries to achieve such widespread acceptance. Elena thought about that. Humans had joined the galactic community relatively recently, but they'd adapted quickly, maybe too quickly. According to some of the older species who complained about human unpredictability and their tendency to ignore established protocols. Humans are good at adapting, she said. We've had to be. Our planet taught us to work with what we have instead of trying to control everything around us. Precisely. Thalandra's silver markings shifted in what Elena was learning might be the Valdorian equivalent of excitement. Most species develop their civilizations in response to their planetary environment. The Zephyrians evolved on a world of crystal formations, so they value structural perfection. The Kithvar developed on a planet with aggressive predators, so they emphasize collective defense. Valdorians emerged from a world where only the strongest survived, so we built our society around hierarchical power. And humans? Humans evolved on a world that was constantly changing. Different climates, natural disasters, shifting continents. Your species learned to survive by being flexible, by working together, by finding creative solutions to impossible problems. Thalandra paused. These are precisely the skills that galactic civilization needs as it grows more complex. Elena felt something click into place. You're not really proposing marriage, are you? You're proposing an alliance. In Valdorian culture, there is no distinction. A merit bond serves both personal and political purposes. Two individuals combine their strengths to achieve goals neither could accomplish alone. But I'm human, Elena pointed out. We don't have merit bonds. We have partnerships based on emotional connection and shared values. And do you not share values with someone who seeks optimal outcomes through cooperation rather than conflict? Thalandra asked. Do you not feel emotional connection to goals that benefit multiple parties rather than just one? Elena opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. When she thought about it that way, maybe they did have more in common than she'd realized. They both wanted to solve problems efficiently. They both preferred strategies that avoided unnecessary conflict. They both seemed to believe that the best solutions made everyone stronger. This is still completely unprecedented, Elena said. Interspecies cooperation is one thing, but formal political bonding? The cultural barriers alone would be enormous. Barriers exist to be overcome by those with sufficient motivation and skill, Thalandra replied. The question is whether you consider the potential benefits worth the effort required. Elena's communication device chimed again. This time the message was from the Federation mediator, requesting that both she and Lady Thalandra attend an emergency session to discuss the unprecedented diplomatic situation. Elena showed the message to Thalandra, who read it with the same expression she might use for a grocery list. They want to contain the situation, Elena said, probably convince you it was a mistake and get everything back to normal. Normal has produced 3 weeks of deadlocked negotiations and no progress on critical resource allocation issues, Thalandra pointed out. Perhaps normal requires reevaluation. Elena stood up and walked to the window that looked out over Harmony Prime's central hub. Thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds moved through the station's corridors, conducting business, sharing information, building the complex web of relationships that held galactic civilization together. It was messy and complicated and sometimes inefficient, but it worked. If we actually went through with this, she said, what would it mean? For our species, for the Federation, for galactic politics in general? It would mean that the two most powerful human and Valdorian representatives had publicly committed to finding solutions that served both of their civilizations' interests, Thalandra said. It would mean that cooperation and strategic thinking had been formally recognized as equal to military might and economic dominance. It would mean that smaller species would have proof that they could achieve security through alliance rather than submission. Elena turned back to face her. And personally, what would it mean for us? It would mean that two individuals with complementary skills had chosen to work together toward common goals. Thalandra's the Emergency Federation Council session was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. The main assembly hall had been reconfigured to accommodate representatives from species that normally didn't attend regular negotiations. Delegates who had traveled for days just to witness what some were calling the most significant diplomatic event in modern galactic history filled every available space. Elena sat at a small table in the center of the hall, feeling like she was on trial. Lady Thalandra occupied an equally isolated position on the opposite side of the room. Between them, Federation mediator Zontar, a tall, thin being from a species that specialized in conflict resolution, attempted to maintain order as dozens of delegates demanded to speak at once. This proceeding will follow established protocols, Zontar announced, their voice carrying the artificial calm that came from centuries of diplomatic training. We are here to address the unprecedented situation that arose during this morning's trade negotiations and determine appropriate next steps. Elder Vorth of the Crystalline Assembly stood first. The Zephyrians had elected him as their spokesperson, and his crystal body rang like a bell when he moved. The Crystalline Assembly requests clarification regarding the legal status of interspecies political bonding. Our records contain no precedent for such arrangements. Because such arrangements have never been necessary, rumbled Commander Kex of the Kithvar military caste. The massive insectoid delegate's forearms gestured in patterns that Elena's translator marked as extreme agitation. Species maintain their own internal hierarchies. Cross-species alliances are managed through formal treaties, not personal bonds. The Melodian Collective finds the concept fascinating, sang Representative Lyra, her musical voice creating harmonies that somehow conveyed curiosity and concern at the same time. However, we question whether biological and cultural compatibility can be bridged through political declaration alone. Elena listened to the debate for nearly an hour before Zontar finally called on her to respond. She stood up, acutely aware that her next words would be analyzed by xenobiologists and political scientists across the galaxy for decades to come. Honored delegates, she began, I think we're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Lady Thalandra made a statement about complementary abilities and shared goals. The rest of us are the ones turning it into a crisis. The human oversimplifies, declared Senator Drix from the Outer Rim Coalition. His species looked like bipedal lizards with elaborate head crests that changed color based on their emotional state. Right now, his crest was flashing, warning colors that Elena's translator helpfully labeled as bureaucratic, panic. Interspecies political bonding could destabilize existing alliance structures throughout the galaxy. How? Elena asked. By proving that different species can work together for mutual benefit? I thought that was the whole point of the Galactic Federation. The Federation operates through careful balance of competing interests, Senator Drix replied. Personal bonds introduce unpredictable emotional elements that could compromise rational decision-making. Elena felt something spark inside her. Not anger, exactly, but frustration with the assumption that cooperation had to be cold and calculating to be effective. Senator, with respect, emotional elements like trust and mutual respect are what make cooperation work in the first place. You can't build lasting alliances based purely on fear and self-interest. The human speaks of trust, Commander Kex clicked, but trust must be earned through demonstrated reliability over time. How can trust exist between species that evolved under completely different conditions, with fundamentally different values? By finding common ground, Elena said. By focusing on shared goals instead of differences. By proving through actions that partnership benefits everyone involved. Theoretical concepts, huffed Representative Grawl of the Trade Guild. His species looked like walking mushrooms with arms, and his voice sounded like air being squeezed through wet sponges. What practical evidence can the human provide that such partnerships produce superior results? Elena was about to answer when alarms started sounding throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the hall in red as Zontar received an urgent communication through their neural implant. The mediator's expression changed from diplomatic calm to genuine concern. We have a situation, Zontar announced. The hegemony of Drath has just entered the system with a full battle fleet. They are demanding immediate surrender of the Kepler asteroid mining rights and threatening to take them by force if we do not comply within 6 hours. The hall erupted into chaos. The Drath hegemony was a military dictatorship that had been expanding aggressively for the past decade. They didn't negotiate, they conquered. Most of the smaller species in the Federation had joined specifically to avoid being absorbed by empires like the Drath. This is exactly what we feared, Senator Drix's crest flashed rapid patterns of alarm. The hegemony has been waiting for signs of weakness in Federation unity. Our internal disputes have provided them with the perfect opportunity to strike. The Outer Rim Coalition cannot stand against Drath battle fleets, Elder Grix of the Torgani said, his small frame trembling. Our worlds will be defenseless if the Federation fractures now. Elena watched the panic spread through the hall and felt her diplomatic training take over. This was exactly the kind of crisis that required clear thinking and creative solutions. The problem was that everyone was so focused on the threat that they couldn't see the opportunities. Wait, she said, standing up again. Everyone stop and think for a minute. The Drath are demanding mining rights to Kepler, right? They're not trying to conquer the entire Federation. They want one specific resource. One specific resource that 3 of our member species have legitimate claims to, Commander Kex pointed out. Surrendering to Drath demands would betray our allies and demonstrate that Federation protection means nothing. I'm not suggesting we surrender, Elena said. I'm suggesting we give them something they want more than Kepler. Zontar tilted their head in the gesture that indicated confusion. What could the Drath possibly want more than exclusive access to rare mineral deposits? Elena walked to the center of the hall, where the holographic display still showed the Kepler system. With a few gestures, she expanded the view to show the surrounding star systems, trade routes, and strategic positions. The Drath are a military empire, she said. What they really want is to expand their territory and increase their power. Kepler is valuable, but it's also isolated. One system with limited strategic importance. What if we offered them something better, such as? Lady Thalandra spoke for the first time since the session began, her voice cutting through the background noise. Elena smiled, feeling pieces of a solution clicking into place. Safe passage through Federation space for their merchant vessels. Access to our trade networks. Formal recognition as a regional power with legitimate interest in this sector. Absolutely not. Senator Drix's crest flashed outraged red. The humans suggest rewarding aggression with political concessions. I'm suggesting giving them a reason to choose cooperation over conquest, Elena replied. Right now, they see us as obstacles to their expansion. What if we became partners instead? The Drath hegemony has no interest in partnership, Commander Kex said. Their culture values only strength and dominance. Then let's show them that cooperation makes them stronger, Elena said. She gestured to the holographic display, highlighting trade routes and resource flows. The Drath need markets for their manufactured goods and sources of raw materials for their industries. We need security for our shipping lanes and protection for smaller member worlds. Those needs complement each other perfectly. You propose an alliance with a militaristic dictatorship? Representative Lyra's musical voice carried notes of disbelief. I propose a business relationship that serves everyone's interests, Elena corrected. The Drath get economic expansion without the cost and risk of military conquest. We get security without having to match their military spending. The smaller species get protection without having to submit to imperial rule. Elena looked around the hall, seeing the same expression on dozens of different faces. The look of people trying to decide whether an idea was brilliant or insane. This is exactly what you were talking about this morning, Lady Thalandra said. And Elena caught something in her voice that might have been admiration. Finding solutions that give each party what they actually need rather than what they claim to want. The human strategy has merit, Elder Vorth chimed, his crystal body resonating with thoughtful tones. Drath expansion seeks markets and resources. Federation security seeks stability and protection. Economic integration could serve both purposes. But can we trust them to honor such agreements? Elder Grix asked. Can we afford not to try? Elena replied. We have 6 hours to find a solution that doesn't involve a war that would devastate half the sector. We can spend those 6 hours arguing about trust and traditional protocols, or we can spend them crafting an offer that makes cooperation more attractive than conquest. Commander Kex's forearms moved in what Elena was learning to recognize as D. The Drath flagship looked like someone had taken a mountain and taught it to fly. Elena stared at the viewscreen of the Federation shuttle as they approached the massive vessel, trying not to think about the fact that its weapons could vaporize Harmony Prime Station with a single volley. Next to her, Lady Thalandra studied a data tablet with the same calm expression she might use for reviewing lunch menus. Nervous? Thalandra asked without looking up. Terrified, Elena admitted. You? Intrigued, Thalandra finally met her eyes. This situation requires us to demonstrate the effectiveness of our partnership under maximum pressure. It is an ideal test of our combined capabilities. Elena shook her head. Only a Valdorian would see a potential interstellar war as a performance evaluation. Their shuttle docked with the Drath flagship through an airlock that felt designed to intimidate visitors. Everything was oversized. Corridors wide enough for tanks, ceiling high enough for giants, walls thick enough to stop artillery. The message was clear. This was a ship built by people who solved problems through superior firepower. The Drath escort team consisted of 4 soldiers in powered armor that made them look like walking tanks. They led Elena and Thalandra through corridors lined with weapon displays and battle trophies to a command center that could have doubled as a fortress throne. Room Admiral Corax of the Drath hegemony sat behind a desk carved from a single piece of black stone. He looked exactly like Elena had expected. 2.5 meters tall, built like a professional wrestler with scars that told stories of personal combat. His uniform was practical rather than decorative, and the weapons on his belt showed signs of regular use. "So," he said in a voice like grinding metal, "the Federation sends me a human child and an exiled Valdorian noble to negotiate for the survival of their alliance." Elena felt her diplomatic smile falter. "Exiled?" Thalandra's expression didn't change, but Elena noticed her hand tighten slightly on her data tablet. "The Admiral appears to have received updated intelligence regarding my current status within the Valdorian Empire. The Valdorian High Council declared you persona non grata 1 hour ago," Korak said with obvious satisfaction, apparently suggesting marriage to an alien has consequences for ambitious nobles. "Who would have thought?" Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Lady Thalandra, is this true?" "It is accurate but incomplete," Thalandra replied. "The High Council has suspended my formal diplomatic status pending a hearing on my recent statements. However, this does not affect my authority to negotiate on behalf of species and organizations with which I have established independent relationships." "What independent relationships?" Korax asked. "As of this morning, I have entered into a preliminary partnership with Ambassador Vasquez of Earth," Thalandra said smoothly. "This partnership gives me authority to speak for human interests in matters that affect both our species." Elena stared at her. "We never actually agreed to any partnership. We agreed to find solutions that serve both of our civilization's interests," Thalandra replied. "The specific legal framework is a matter of implementation details." "You cannot be serious," Korax rumbled, but Elena caught something in his expression that might have been amusement. "You expect me to negotiate with a human diplomat and a disgraced Valdorian who has been cast out by her own people?" "I expect you to negotiate with 2 individuals who have demonstrated the ability to find creative solutions to complex problems," Elena said, her diplomatic training finally kicking in. "Whether our governments approve of our methods is less important than whether those methods produce results." "And what results do you propose to produce?" Elena activated her portable holographic projector, filling the space between them with a 3-dimensional map of the sector. "Admiral, your empire wants to expand its influence and access new markets for your goods. The Federation wants security for our trade routes and protection for our member worlds. The current situation puts those goals in conflict, but it doesn't have to." She highlighted key systems and trade routes as she spoke. "Right now, you're planning to take the Kepler mining rights by force. That gives you 1 asteroid field and makes the entire Federation your enemy. What if instead of taking 1 resource by conquest, you gained access to dozens of resources through partnership?" "Partnership." Korax made the word sound like profanity. "The Drath hegemony does not make partnerships with inferiors." "Then don't," Thalandra said. "Make a strategic alliance with equals." Elena saw what Thalandra was doing and felt a moment of appreciation for Valdorian strategic thinking. "The Drath Empire has military superiority in this sector," Elena continued. "That's a fact. But military superiority isn't the same as economic efficiency. You could conquer a dozen worlds and spend decades integrating them into your empire, or you could establish trade relationships that give you immediate access to their resources without the overhead costs of occupation." "You suggest that trade is more profitable than conquest?" Korax asked. "I suggest that smart conquest includes economic elements," Thalandra said. "Military victory establishes dominance. Economic integration maintains it with minimal ongoing resource expenditure. Elena pulled up economic data from her files. Look at the numbers, Admiral. The Drath Empire spends approximately 30% of its total resources on military expansion and occupation forces. Federation trade networks generate equivalent resource access with less than 5% overhead costs. Because you rely on others for your security, Corax pointed out. Because we've learned that cooperation is more efficient than coercion, Elena replied. But efficiency doesn't require weakness. What if the Federation's trade networks had the backing of Drath military power? What if Drath expansion had access to Federation economic infrastructure? She gestured to the holographic display, showing shipping lanes and resource flows. Your empire produces the best military hardware in the galaxy. Federation worlds need security and are willing to pay for it. Your expansion requires raw materials and manufactured goods. Federation trade networks can provide both. A protection arrangement, Corax mused. The Drath provide security. Federation worlds provide economic access. More than that, Talandra added. A regional partnership that makes both sides stronger than either could be alone. The Drath gain economic expansion without the costs of conquest. The Federation gains security without having to match your military spending. Elena could see Corax considering the proposal, but she could also see resistance in his expression. What's the real obstacle here, Admiral? Is it the economics or is it something else? The Drath do not compromise, he said. We do not negotiate from positions of weakness. We take what we want by force because force is the only language that inferior species understand. With respect, Elena said, we're not asking you to compromise. We're asking you to be smart about how you get what you want. And what makes you think you understand what we want? Elena stood up and walked to the holographic display. Because I've been watching the patterns of Drath expansion for the past 6 months. You don't just conquer random systems. You target specific resources, trade choke points, and strategic positions. That's not the behavior of mindless aggressors. That's the behavior of intelligent leaders who understand that power requires both military strength and economic foundation. She highlighted several systems that the Drath had conquered in recent years. Every one of these conquests served a specific strategic purpose. You're not expanding for the sake of expansion. You're building something. The question is whether you want to build it the slow way through conquest or the fast way through partnership. Corax stood up, his massive frame casting shadows across the room. For a moment, Elena thought she had pushed too far. Then he began to laugh, a sound like boulders rolling downhill. The little human thinks she understands Drath strategy better than Drath admirals, he said. And the exiled Valdorian believes that cooperation makes empires stronger than conquest. I believe that results matter more than methods, Talandra replied calmly. And I believe that this proposal offers the Drath Empire better results with lower costs than continued military expansion. Perhaps, Corax said. But you assume that I have the authority to make such agreements. The Drath Council values strength above all else. They will not accept partnership with species they consider weak. Elena felt inspiration strike. Then don't ask them to accept partnership. Ask them to approve a demonstration. What kind of demonstration? Give us 60 days to prove that cooperative strategy produces superior results, Elena said. Choose one system, somewhere that you were planning to conquer anyway. Let us try the partnership approach first. If it works better than conquest, expand the program. If it doesn't, you've only lost 2 months before proceeding with your original plans. And if the demonstration succeeds? Talandra asked. What would that prove to the Drath Council? Corax walked to the window that looked out at his battle fleet. It would prove that the Drath Empire had found a way to expand its influence without depleting its military resources. It would prove that cooperation could be a form of strength rather than weakness. Elena exchanged a look with Talandra. Is that something your council why? 60 days later, Elena stood in the observation deck of the newly established Kepler Joint Operations Center, watching mining ships from 7 different species work together to extract resources from the asteroid fields. The sight still amazed her. Zephyrian crystal-cutting technology, Kathvar transport vessels, Torgani navigation expertise, and Drath security escorts all operating as parts of a single coordinated effort. The demonstration project had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Instead of the Drath conquering the Kepler system, they had become the security partners for the most efficient mining operation in the galaxy. Instead of 3 species fighting over mining rights, they had formed a consortium that was generating profits for everyone involved. Instead of the Federation losing a strategic resource to imperial aggression, they had gained a powerful ally who was discovering that partnership paid better than conquest. The monthly productivity reports are in, Thalandra said, entering the observation deck with a data tablet in hand. She had spent most of the past 2 months aboard the operations center, coordinating between different species and making sure that their improvised alliance actually worked in practice. Good news or bad news? Elena asked. Exceptional news. The Kepler operation is producing 30% more refined materials than any of the species could have achieved individually. Transport costs are down 40% due to Drath escort protection, and the Torgani environmental monitoring has identified 3 additional asteroid clusters with valuable deposits that everyone missed in their original surveys. Elena smiled, feeling the satisfaction of a plan that had actually worked. And the Drath Council's response to Admiral Corax's reports? They have approved expansion of the partnership model to 2 additional systems, Thalandra said. Apparently, the economic advantages have convinced them that cooperation can be a form of strength rather than weakness. The past 60 days had been the most challenging and rewarding of Elena's diplomatic career. Working with Thalandra to coordinate between different species, different cultures, and different approaches to problem solving had required every skill she possessed and forced her to develop new ones. But the results spoke for themselves. There's something else, Thalandra continued. The Valdorian High Council has requested a formal hearing regarding my status within the Empire. Elena felt her stomach tighten. What kind of hearing? The kind where they either officially exile me for violating traditional values, or officially recognize that my methods have produced superior results and deserve consideration for broader application. And which outcome do you think is more likely? Thalandra moved to stand next to Elena at the observation window. Honestly, I am not certain. Valdorian society values results, but it also values conformity to established hierarchies. What we have accomplished here challenges some fundamental assumptions about how power should be exercised. Elena watched a Drath security cruiser escort a convoy of mining vessels toward the processing station. Have you thought about what you'll do if they decide to exile you permanently? I have considered various possibilities, Thalandra replied, including the option of formalizing our partnership through Federation diplomatic channels rather than relying on Valdorian authority. You mean actually going through with the marriage thing? I mean establishing a formal diplomatic relationship that serves both of our species' interests while allowing us to continue developing cooperative solutions to complex problems. Thalandra paused. Whether such a relationship eventually includes personal elements would depend on factors that neither of us can predict or control. Elena had been thinking about the same questions for weeks. Working closely with Thalandra had taught her that despite their different backgrounds, they shared similar approaches to leadership and problem-solving. More than that, she had come to appreciate Thalandra's intelligence, her integrity, and her willingness to challenge conventional thinking when better solutions were available. The Federation Council has been talking about creating a new position, Elena said, Secretary for Interspecies Cooperation, someone whose job would be to find ways for different civilizations to work together more effectively. An interesting concept. Who are they considering for the position? They've asked if I would be interested, but the job would require working closely with representatives from all major galactic powers, including the Valdorian Empire. Elena met Thalandra's eyes. I told them I would only consider it if I could choose my own deputy. Thalandra's silver marking shifted, and what Elena had learned was the Valdorian equivalent of surprised pleasure. You would offer me a position within the Federation government? I would offer you a partnership within a new model of galactic cooperation, Elena corrected. Whether that partnership serves Federation interests, Valdorian interests, or the interests of some new kind of alliance we haven't defined yet, would depend on how things develop. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Corax, who had become a regular visitor to the operations center. The massive Drath commander had to duck slightly to fit through the doorway, but his expression was more thoughtful than threatening. The latest efficiency reports confirm what we have suspected, he announced without preamble. Cooperative resource extraction produces superior results compared to conquest-based acquisition. The Drath Council has authorized me to discuss expansion of our partnership agreements. What kind of expansion? Elena asked. Full regional alliance. The Drath Empire would provide security services for Federation trade networks in exchange for preferential access to resources and markets. Federation worlds would gain military protection without having to develop their own defense capabilities. Smaller species would have security guarantees that allow them to focus on their economic and technological specialties. Elena felt excitement building. That's exactly what we hoped would happen. Proof that cooperation can transform potential enemies into essential allies. Indeed, Corax rumbled. But the Council has one additional requirement. They want assurance that the Federation approach to cooperation will be managed by individuals who have demonstrated both competence and commitment to mutual benefit. Thalandra tilted her head slightly. Meaning what specifically? Meaning that they want the cooperative programs to be administered by the same team that designed and proved them, Corax said. The Drath Empire does not wish to work with Federation bureaucrats who view partnership as a temporary convenience. We want to work with leaders who understand that true alliance requires permanent commitment to shared success. Elena looked at Thalandra, seeing her own thoughts reflected in the other woman's expression. What had started as an impulsive statement during trade negotiations had evolved into something that could reshape galactic politics for centuries to come. Are you asking us to make our partnership official? Elena asked. I am asking whether you are prepared to demonstrate the same level of commitment to cooperation that you expect from others, Corax replied. The Drath respects strength, but we also respect consistency. If you believe that alliance produces superior results to competition, then your own relationship should exemplify that principle. Elena walked back to the observation window, looking out at the mining operation that had become a symbol of what different species could accomplish when they worked together, instead of against each other. Humans, Valdorians, Zephyrians, Kithvar, Torgani, and now Drath, all contributing their unique abilities to achieve goals that none of them could have reached alone. What do you think? She asked Thalandra. I think that we have proven cooperation produces superior results to competition, Thalandra replied. I think that our combined abilities have achieved more than either of us could have accomplished individually, and I think that the galaxy needs leaders who are willing to demonstrate their principles through their actions, rather than just their words. Elena nodded slowly. Then I guess the question is whether we're ready to show the galaxy what true partnership looks like. Indeed it is, Thalandra said. Are we? Elena looked around the observation deck, at the mining operation that represented successful cooperation, at Admiral Corax, who embodied the transformation of enemy into ally, at Lady Thalandra, who had become both her greatest challenge and her most trusted partner. Yes, she said, I think we are. 6 months later, the galaxy received news that Ambassador Elena Vasquez, of Earth, and Lady Thalandra, of the Valdorian Empire, had formalized their partnership through a new kind of interspecies alliance that combined human cooperative philosophy with Valdorian strategic thinking. The alliance would serve as the foundation for the Federation's new Department of Interspecies Cooperation, which had already facilitated partnerships between dozens of previously incompatible civilizations. The news was met with everything from celebration to skepticism to outright panic, depending on who was receiving it, but the results spoke for themselves. The Kepler model had been successfully replicated in 8 different systems. The Drath Empire had become one of the Federation's strongest allies. Smaller species were experiencing unprecedented security and prosperity through cooperative resource sharing.